Thanks, everybody. Very much missing getting to see everyone in person this year, of course, especially during our town hall session, since that is always the staff favorite, because it's our chance to get to interact a little bit more with all of you. Hopefully, at least the live session will give a little bit of time for that. But here today, Tony and I are just going to give you a little bit of an update on what's been happening in the trade policy universe throughout 2020. So this year in particular was surprisingly a really good one.
Certainly last year was a significant one to beat, with dairy exports totaling roughly $6 billion in 2019, yet somehow month after month, despite all the headwinds in 2020, our exporters have been posting gains month on month compared to last year. And certainly policy developments throughout this year have played a role in helping to support that progress. Things like the Japan agreement, which Tony will talk about a little bit later. And on the non-tariff side of things, the China agreement that I'll talk about in a few minutes. We also took a little bit of a look back this year, working together with the U.S. Dairy Export Council to analyze the benefits that our industry's seen over the last several years from a whole host of different free trade agreements that have been put in place prior to 2020 to try to quantify just how big the benefits to our industry are from all of those trade agreements. They've racked up to seeing export gains of roughly 1.4 billion gallons of milk just to our FTA partners since they've been put in place, underscoring for us two things. One, just how important our trade agreement partners are to our export portfolio. And two, given the fact that that's a pretty small set of countries, the significant opportunity that still remains for us to be able to catapult those sales even further with additional good agreements in the future as well. This slide's a quick look at the myriad of different trade policy related issues that we've been working on throughout this year. In today's presentation, we're really just going to touch on more of the headline topics, things that you've probably heard of in the news in terms of USMCA, China, etc. But if there's interest in some of these weedier topics that are all relevant to helping keep doors open for U.S. dairy products around the world and minimizing the likelihood that we see barriers crop up, you know where to find us, and you can also pose questions during the live town hall session. Taking a look in more detail first at the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement. So I will say this is the one piece that makes me a little bit glad that we're not in person, because there are quite a few people that I owe money to for getting the bet on when USMCA would be passed off by about 2 weeks. So rather than concluding and being passed into place by the end of 2019, instead, Congress finally finished the business there and passed the agreement in January. And we owe tremendous thanks to so many of you and your cooperatives for partnering with us all throughout last year to try to help get to that final result. Dairy was critical to getting the type of strong bipartisan approval that we saw under that agreement. Once that happened, though, our focus really shifted from trying to get it passed and in place to trying to get the details right. The implementation pieces related to making sure that we get the full benefit of the bargain that the U.S. negotiated for has been squarely our focus throughout this year. And again, on this front as well, working hand in hand with many of you and your cooperatives. And in that matter, we've been looking both to the north and to the south. On the Canadian side, a lot of the issues that we knew would be trouble spots have proven to be so. And that's the case in particular with respect to how Canada has handled its tariff rate quotas, who it's divvying them out to in the supply chain up in Canada, and the impacts that has on our ability to ship different types of products as a result. We've been advocating for the U.S. government to step in and insist that Canada change those rules so that we have a fair shot at what we want to export to the Canadian market under USMCA. Equally important, of course, are the fine print related to Canada's commitments around elimination of Class 7. It made a number of promises in terms of changes to its dairy pricing policies, transparency and consultation commitments with us, all of which we believe are going to be critical to ensuring that we see the full-fledged changes made that USMCA was intended to deliver. Some of those have been put in place to date. Canada has a little bit of time still until the end of this year to make other steps as well, though, and watching how that develops and communicating with our government about what we need to see done instead continues to be where we're centered. On the Mexican side, we've had our eye on a lot more miscellaneous regulatory problems that seem to keep cropping up from one area to another that frankly have been at odds with USMCA's goals of restoring smoothness and trade certainty throughout the North American region. And so those are the types of concerns that we've been elevating to the US government and working with them to try to help iron out so that we can continue to export the full spectrum of products that we produce to our biggest market, Mexico. On another front, China. This year was also a big one with respect to the U.S.-China Phase 1 agreement. This deal was implemented in February, and by this point is well in effect and has resulted in numerous improvements on various non-tariff barrier and regulatory issues related to dairy that were captured by the deal. Things like being able to smoothly and reliably add new dairy facilities to the list of companies that China lets export to its market, as well as product approvals for other things that our companies want to ship to this fast-growing market. Now those doors have finally been opened for them as a result of this agreement. But that's not to say the work is done there either. Instead, once those regulatory and non-tariff pieces were put in place throughout the first portion of the year, our focus has really shifted over to the tariff and dairy purchases pieces of the agreement. We still face dairy retaliatory tariffs on a whole host of different products. We were able to work successfully with the U.S. Dairy Export Council to get a year-long waiver for whey for feed products, but we recognize that there's a whole host of others that need that similar tariff relief. And so pushing for that with China and with our own government is one of the key focus areas for us at this point. As is working to elevate the need for China to step up a little bit, it's buying on the dairy front. As part of the agreement, China committed to make billions and billions of dollars of additional purchases in U.S. agriculture products. And so what we'd like to be seeing is a significant uptick, not just in our sales to China, but importantly in our market share for key products, things like milk powders and cheeses, for instance, where we really haven't seen a significant shift in terms of China prioritizing, encouraging its companies to be looking to the U.S. as a key supplier. So those will be the types of areas that throughout the remainder of this year and most likely into 2021 as well will be where we're working with many of you to try to keep the noise up with respect to what dairy needs to see out of China moving ahead. With that, I'll pass things to you, Tony.
All right, so moving on to Japan, we were happy to see this year that the U.S. and Japan signed a Phase 1 limited deal early in 2020. This is sort of a down payment, so to speak, on a trade deal. We were able to gain some access for whey, for cheese, some cheeses, and lactose, which helped us bring us up to parity, at least level the playing field a little bit with some of our competitors, namely New Zealand, Australia, and the European Union, which we were glad to see. And as a result, throughout 2020, we've seen volume and market share increase as part of this limited agreement. Now, looking forward, we're looking to expand upon those gains and at the very least, achieve parity on a number of other products and surpass tariff reductions, given that the U.S. and Japan have been such strong trading partners in the past. And looking forward, we're looking for increased access on butter, skim milk powder, and evaporated and condensed milk, some areas where we hadn't reached parity in the past. We're looking to at least, once again, level the playing field on those products as well as surpass the tariff reductions there. Beyond that, we're also looking for some text, some strong language on the protection of common names in context of the European Union's GI restrictions, which I'll get to in a bit here, and sanitary and phytosanitary issues. We've sort of combined all of these asks into a letter that we facilitated in the House earlier this year in June, a letter to the U.S. government, the Trade Representative's Office, on pursuing a full trade agreement where we can move forward and not lose market share as our competitors are given preferential access in this really important market for U.S. dairy. So moving ahead, as I mentioned, on common names and GIs, the EU, we've seen the EU, the European Union, become more and more aggressive in their attempt to restrict the use of common cheese names, like mozzarella, Parmesan, and Asiago, in markets around the globe. And in the past, we had more of a reactive approach. This was a partnership with the Consortium for Common Food Names in filing oppositions to GI restrictions that would effectively monopolize or restrict the use of these generic terms to just European cheesemakers. In 2020, and largely throughout this past year, we've turned to more of a proactive approach, particularly in establishing a precedent in USMCA on the protection of a list of names to be protected and safeguarded from GI abuse in perpetuity. We're looking to expand upon that effort and effectively have U.S. policy established that in any trade negotiation going forward, these names, such a list of names, is to be included, as well as strong due process rules for the determination of whether a term is generic or not. We had a letter sent on this effort, signed by 61 senators. We're now looking to replicate that effort in the House. If you have contacts, we strongly encourage you to use the National Mail call to action and reach out to your elected official and encourage them to sign on to this letter for this really important message. On the other front, NMPF, working in concert with CCFN, has secured new and strong due process rules with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to protect against bad faith geographical indication filers, anyone filing an application in the U.S. market looking to restrict a common term. And as a result of those rules, we saw a favorable ruling from the U.S. government on Gruyere. This was something we applauded recently, but now we're looking towards next steps as the Consortium for the Gruyere cheese producers has filed an appeal, and we're going to be moving forward with the opposition process there as well. And beyond the U.S. borders, we also continue the work we've done in opposing GI restrictions in markets around the globe, where we have to compete with the European Union, not only on fair playing ground, but also when the EU tries to monopolize these terms for their own use and effectively shut us out of their markets. This is an ongoing effort. We really appreciate the support our members have given in the past, and we look forward to working alongside all of you in the future. And with that, I'll pass it back to Shawna.
Thanks, Tony. To close things out here, I'm just going to do a short touch on a few other topics. You saw earlier the wide range of issues that we're working on a regular basis to help open doors for U.S. dairy exports, smooth the process out, and prevent barriers to trade. Dialing in on a handful of those that we've worked really closely together with our partners at the U.S. Dairy Export Council on. This slide captures a few of those. Very recently, the USDA and FDA announced a new protocol agreement, a memorandum of understanding that they had arrived at to better help facilitate U.S. dairy exports. This MOU is intended to really outline and memorialize whose job is what, especially when a non-tariff barrier comes up that requires those two agencies to work together and in collaboration with us as well to help resolve those problems. We fully expect that this years-long effort that's finally reached a conclusion will be very helpful in resolving more speedily and more effectively problems that crop up in a variety of markets in the future as it relates to these non-tariff challenges. Also in Southeast Asia, a region that is extremely important for our dairy exports at this stage, particularly for various dairy ingredient products. Two things in particular that we thought were worth bringing to your attention this year. The first of those is the work that we've been doing in Vietnam over the last year and a half or so, where we pursued an initiative of filing a petition with the Vietnamese government to request them to use their process of occasionally putting in place unilateral tariff cuts for all global suppliers in order to reduce tariffs on a number of different dairy products. We went after this because we could see the writing on the wall with an EU-Vietnam agreement that was heading into effect and in fact did implement in 2020, and an agreement that Vietnam already had with Oceania and New Zealand that over time was making U.S. suppliers less competitive in that key market. These tariff cuts help narrow that gap significantly, particularly for the key products covered like milk powder, cheese, whey, and lactose, so that our exporters are not at a significant disadvantage shipping into this top 10 dairy export market. Another area also in that region that we've been focused on throughout this year has been Indonesia. It's a huge market, but also one that a lot of companies are still eager to get into and haven't been yet already, or they're eager, maybe they have a foot in the door with one dairy facility exporting to that market, but they have other facilities making a different spectrum of products that they want to be able to ship from as well. Indonesia has a process where each dairy plant has to be individually applied for and considered before they're granted approval to ship. For a while at the start of this year and throughout a lot of last year, we had a logjam where Indonesia was simply refusing to approve any new facilities. At the end of the first quarter of this year, we were able to work with the U.S. government and get that broken so that we began to see Indonesia at least reviewing these applications and approving a few facilities. Our focus at this stage and more recently has really been on trying to speed that up so that the people that are eager to ship their products to this market and grow what's already a sizable export destination for us even further have the ability to actually do that. That's our short recap for 2020 trade policy issues. We very much look forward to continuing to work with all of you and with your cooperatives on the wide spectrum of trade policy matters that make a big difference for dairy farmers and dairy exporters in the year to come as well. Thank you.